All right, guys. Well, welcome. We'll get started officially. Welcome to PhillyPoSH for July. We're a week behind due to the holiday, but the good news is we'll have another meeting in August coming up in 2 weeks, real quick. So we don't have much to go over as far as news and agenda stuff, but just wanted to highlight a few things real quick before we get to our presenter, and that is coming up on next week, actually, July 18th. Jeffrey Snover, who, if you don't know, distinguished engineer and lead architect for Windows Server and System Center, is also the inventor of Windows PowerShell. He's going to be joined by Jason Helmick, and they're going to be doing a two-part free Microsoft Virtual Academy Jumpstart series. It's a whole day thing. So July 18th from, I think it's like 9 to 5 Pacific time. You can join the webcast, and they're going to go cover beginning stuff, getting started with PowerShell 3. And then there's a follow-up one that's going to be held August 1st. And that is more about creating tools and taking it to a more advanced level of getting comfortable with PowerShell. So I'm definitely even, going to make it a point to jump in there and be on that, you never know, whatever your skill level, what you're going to be able to pick up. I'm not sure if they're going to have it recorded and.
Lito, they are recording it.
Oh, they are? Awesome.
Yep.
Cool. So everybody, that's June Blender. Say hi, everybody. So June is going to be doing a wonderful presentation for us in a moment. But before we get to that real quick, our Twitter account, we put some time in to pull in some feeds, things from the Hey Scripting Guy blog, the PowerShell.com articles that get posted. We also have some other things that are getting put into that stream on a regular basis. So if you haven't already, even if you're not super into Twitter, this is at least, we're trying to make it a good, resource for you guys to have timely information about PowerShell tips and news and stuff like that. Another thing I want to mention is there's a great series of things happening on PowerShell.org. One of them is called this Great Debate series of posts, which I think is pretty interesting. And basically, what Don Jones has put up there are a series of things that you can, have conversations with fellow scripters as far as what you consider to be good best practices or ways to handle things like the usage of backticks or the usage of, the techniques you use to perform error handling and trapping and those types of things. So as you get into PowerShell more and more, you'll find that you kind of develop these various techniques and practices, and it's always, in my opinion, great to hear what other people have adapted or adopted, and good to keep an eye on that. So we'll put a link to all this on our post following the meeting, but the Great Debate series I think is really cool. Next up, the Power Scripting podcast. They're asking the community for show ideas, so they want to hear from you about who you'd like to hear on the podcast. If you frequently listen to the podcast, it's a great way to, if there's a particular technology or there's a particular person that you'd like to hear interviewed or something like that, definitely give them that feedback. They're looking for ideas for the show. Tonight, actually, they're recording a version of episode of the podcast, and it's featuring the winners of the 2013 scripting games. So Mike F. Robbins is the winner of the advanced category, and it's just a great opportunity to hear from somebody who both him and the beginner winner, I believe, are going to be featured on the podcast. So stay tuned for that. Right before the meeting, we were talking about something called Chocolatey. I don't know if anybody is all that familiar with Chocolatey, but it's basically a package management and installation, ad hoc installation utility that allows you a similar functionality to something like apt-get or yum from the Linux side of the house. So once you install it, you can then just query the repository for any available package. There's a lot of them listed, and it'll automatically figure out whatever the dependencies are for that, download it, install it for you, add it to your path, and then you're off to the races as far as that goes. So definitely something to whenever you're setting up a new admin workstation for yourself and you have all those freeware software things that you find yourself installing over and over, this is a huge time saver for that. I think even in the chat tonight, where Ron Edwards is in our chat, he was speaking at our last meeting about managing security ACLs and security descriptors in PowerShell. He has just recently released a PowerShell access control module, and that's actually here on the TechNet Script Center that you can go download. So everything that he talked about in the last meeting is up there on the Script Center for you to use. And then what he's doing over time is releasing a series of articles on his blog that goes into depth about each one of the script commandlets that he wrote and how to use them. So definitely check that out, and we'll have all this, all these links on our blog. If you go to PhillyPoSH.org, there should be a link there on our user group page that's hosted on PowerShell.org. You can click on the blog link; it'll take you to the blog post category for all of our meetings, where you can get information and basically post-meeting show notes, if you will, all the links that we talk about. So that's it from our side. Right now I'm going to switch over to June. And June, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, awesome. So June is a senior programming writer for Microsoft. She most notably was a member of the PowerShell team writing Help. Is that right, June?
Yep.
So all of the awesomeness that is Help in PowerShell is thanks in part to June. And she's since moved on. You're working on the Azure team now?
On Azure Active Directory.
Oh, Active Directory. My apologies.
No, so, Azure Active Directory. So
Azure Active
Cloud Identity.
Even better.
Yeah.
So we're very pleased and happy to have June with us. She's going to go over some hidden charms of Windows PowerShell 3 and 4. And before we actually dive into the presentation, I guess, June, you wanted to take a poll of the audience and see what people are interested in hearing about tonight?
Yeah, I have some what I think of are great features that aren't particularly well known in PowerShell 3 and 4, but we probably have too much information. So if people are particularly interested in PowerShell 4, we can do that. If not, I can go into a little more depth on PowerShell 3.
So raise a show of hands, who would like to hear about PowerShell 4 stuff tonight?
At the expense of PowerShell 3 stuff.
At the expense of not. So that was 3. So the majority would be then. So how many people want to hear about PowerShell 3 specifically? All right. So the majority of the room, June, is raising their hands for PowerShell 3.
Okay.
She does have some. Yeah, so the feedback right now is if you had something besides DSC to talk about in V4, that would be
in fact, yeah, everything that I have to talk about is PowerShell 4 beside DSC because there's so much DSC stuff out there.
Okay. Okay, so given that information, let's see a show of hands again. V4. Oh man, you're by yourself. And then V3 again. All right, so it looks like V3 wins out.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is go through this deck a little bit, and then I've sent the deck to Lido and John. They have it, and they can distribute it to you. And what this is really a survey of some things in PowerShell 3.0 and 4.0. And there's really a difference when you do these presentations between teaching and telling. And instead of a teaching presentation, this is more of a telling presentation. So we're just going to go over at a high level a whole bunch of features. And once we get past the intro slides, you'll see that in the lower left corner of the slides, let's see if I can get down to one here. In the lower left corner of the slides, there's a reference for where you go to get more help for the feature that I'm talking about. And really, to make best use of this presentation, you take it home, you open up a PowerShell window, you try the things that I've talked about, especially the ones that you're unfamiliar with, and then go and read about it. So you can start with a little help reference that I have down here in the lower left corner, and then continue by searching for help terms online and reading blogs and looking at other presentations. And getting your hands in and working with it is really the very best way to learn. So I'm going to go back, if I can. There we go. So I want to mention, first of all, that I was born and raised in Philadelphia, so this is my virtual hometown. My parents were born in South Philly. I was born near the Boulevard and F Street. I grew up in the Northeast near Crewstown Shopping Center. I went to George Washington High School. My dad worked at Kuttner Buick at Castor and Cotman. I'm not even sure it's there anymore. I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and it was there that I found Carnegie Mellon University down the street, and that was my first interaction with computing. After I left Pitt, I actually went to work for Congressman Bill Gray, who just passed away, Congressman Gray from Philadelphia. And I was doing political things, but in his office, they brought in the first computers, and they were really rudimentary. But nobody was willing to touch them. So I had no trouble grabbing the manual and going through, and that's how my sort of career in computing began. I moved to Seattle in 1985, I guess, before you guys were born, and got a job for Microsoft in 1995. So I've actually been at Microsoft as an employee and as a contractor for about 18 years. So a little too long. I've had about 6 different jobs. I'm actually doing a new job now in Azure Active Directory, which, as I mentioned, is cloud identity. But I got to work on the PowerShell team with Jeffrey Snover and Bruce Payette and Lee Holmes and all those fabulous folks, working from PowerShell 1.0 to 3.0. So it was a great experience. I had a wonderful time. So now I'm a member of the PowerShell community, and what I just wanted to share with you again were some features of PowerShell 3 that I don't think are getting as much attention as they're worth. So I'm going to just start by going through. Here's the list of topics, and I'm just going to scroll through this a little bit. I just want to mention to people who are playing with PowerShell 4 that it's just a preview. And if it's anything like the previews of PowerShell 2 and 3, many features change between the release of the preview and the final release of the product. So don't take any dependencies and scripts on the features that are in the preview. Even DSC is likely to change. But this is a great time to preview those features and send the team feedback on the blog posts, in Connect, in forums. Okay. So that's said, and we can go through this. So I'm going to talk about the features in PowerShell 3.0. Each of these should take just a few minutes, so we should get through all of them. Yeah. I just picked out a few of my favorites. So these are the ones we're going to talk about tonight, but my guess is that this isn't a huge crowd, so I would really encourage you to, raise your hand, John or Lito or somebody there will recognize you or just speak up. I think I could probably hear you. So it's much better if this is a conversation. If I'm going too fast, because I still speak like a Philadelphian, slow me down, and if I'm going too slow or there's information that you want just let me know and I'll speed up, and feel free to throw a question in there, whatever you'd like. So one thing I would like to point out about 4.0, even though that one wasn't voted on, is that when you download and install PowerShell 3.0, you get 2.0 running side by side. That 2.0 installation, which was included for backward compatibility, is not part of PowerShell. It's not part of the PowerShell 4.0 preview. You can still download it separately if you need it, typically for compatibility with IDEs that people paid for, but there might be some modules that you need 2.0 for. So if you install 4.0 through the Windows Management Framework update for PowerShell 4, it does not write over PowerShell 2. So you still have PowerShell 2, but you no longer have PowerShell 3. So I can take questions about that at the end. So let's talk a little bit about PowerShell 3. One of the goals of PowerShell 3 was to make PowerShell much easier to use. So they've simplified the syntax and gotten rid of the curly braces and $undersign, things that we type automatically if you've been doing PowerShell for a while, but just trying to make everybody successful, making everything work. And these are very well known, but I just wanted to mention a few gotchas. And gotchas are just little things that might creep up as problems. They're frequently encountered problems, and I just wanted to mention them. These are particularly helpful if you're teaching beginners, because every PowerShell user is a potential teacher. So for each object, we've removed the curly braces and the $sign in the underbar, as Jeffrey Snover says, and you can just use the same, you can use the same command that you would have included in a script block without the script block, okay? But here's the little gotcha. So if I'm looking at a first level property of an object, like the module object has a nested module property, right? Then I can omit the curly braces. But if I'm looking at a property of that property, so here we have the name property of the nested modules property, then you still need the curly braces and the $sign and the underscore. Okay? Similarly, where object has the simplified syntax, and you can just omit those curly braces. PowerShell lets you get properties of multiple objects. So the scheduled job module has a name property, but a collection of modules does not have the name property. But in PowerShell 2, if you try to get the name property of a collection, right, the collection doesn't have a name property and the command will fail. But in PowerShell 3, if PowerShell notices that you're looking for a property that's not a property of the collection, it will actually look inside the collection at the objects in the collection, and it will return what you expect. This is really a great feature. This is one of those things about just making it work for you. Similarly, you can invoke methods on multiple objects, even when the collection of objects doesn't have the method. So here you see an example of the toUpper method of strings, which in PowerShell 2 would work on a single string, but collections of strings don't have a toUpper property, so it would fail. And in PowerShell 3 and in PowerShell 4, you can use the toUpper property either on a single string or on a collection of strings, and it will work for you. Okay. Going back the other way, the count and length properties, which are properties of all collections, wouldn't work on a single object. And this messed up scripts all over the place. I know it messed up mine. If you have an arbitrary number of objects, you don't know how many you're going to have, you couldn't use the count property. You'd have to, do something a little more clever. But in PowerShell 3, you can get the count property of a single object or even 0 objects. It just works. Okay. In get command, this was a breaking change, but a really good one. In PowerShell 2, get command got only commands in the current session. In fact, PowerShell 3 made many things that weren't session specific, or that were session specific, non-session specific, and we'll see that as we go through, as we get into the more advanced features. So in PowerShell 3, get command gets all of the commands that are in the current session plus all of the commands in all of the modules in the PS module path environment variable. So we also have module auto loading, which allowed you to just get the modules that you need, query the modules that you need, and not even have to think about importing them. But just a little bit of a gotcha there. If you're using wildcards, if you're searching, PowerShell thinks that you're doing commandlet discovery and not trying to use the commandlet, so it doesn't automatically import the module for you. And it also won't auto-load modules that are not in paths that are listed in the PS module path environment variable. So here's another gotcha. This is a little puzzle, and I'd like this to be interactive if we can manage that in this kind of weird room. So I do a get job command on a job name called my schedule job, and I get nothing. Now I know that I've got that schedule job out there. I know it's running, so I must have instances of it, right? So I look just to make sure that I have that schedule job on this machine, and I do. And so then I run the same command again, that get job, job name, my schedule job, and now get job finds the job. Anybody know what happened here?
No takers, June.
No takers. Okay, well, what happened? Do you know, Lido? You've got it, right?
So is the module not been imported yet by the time that it...
Yeah, that's exactly it. So what happened with that first command is that we didn't have the schedule job module. And the schedule job module creates its own job type. It's called the schedule job type. And so when I ran that get schedule job command, that second command, it automatically downloaded and installed the schedule job module for me. So then when I ran it again, I had the job type in my session, and get job was able to find it. Okay, this will drive you crazy if you don't know about it. And I included it over and over again in the help for scheduled jobs. But you might run into this with other modules that create either job types or other functions that aren't in your session by default and are exported by the module. So look out for this one. If you think that something should be there that's not there, you can explicitly import the module and try it again. So this is a great thing. This is not well used, and I tried to talk about this during the scripting games. Get child item has a whole bunch of new parameters that help you refine your search. These parameters aren't really in the get child item commandlet. So if you're doing some examination of get child item, you won't find these. They're actually added by the file system provider to the get child item commandlet. So if you're looking in a reflector, you won't see these in the commandlet. You'll find them in the file system provider. So if you're in a different PS drive, if you're in the WSMan drive, if you're in a registry drive, and you look at get child item, you won't find these. But if you're in a file system drive, you will, and they are incredibly handy. That last thing, by the way, can you guys see my cursor?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, good. This little guy, this is kind of cool. This uses the attributes parameter, and it's saying that it doesn't want directories, and it doesn't want directories that are hidden. That are hidden. So what it gets is it gets all files, even hidden files, but no directories. This is a real quick and easy way to do it. Do not do this to beginners, please. Please use explicit parameters, but this is incredibly helpful, okay? Great thing to do. We'll be talking about some more provider-specific features because I think that they're really important, they're really useful, and they don't get as much play as they need to. So another great thing is getHelp.show window, which opens help in a separate window so that you can scroll around in it. It has this little search box up here, and it has this cool setting box. If all you want to see are examples, you can do that, and it saves the settings. There's a little gotcha, though, with show window, and I don't see this fixed in the preview of PowerShell 4, but it's still just a preview. And that's that getHelp.show window displays only the first paragraph of parameter descriptions. Now,
hey, June, can I ask you a quick question?
Oh, you bet.
So when you do show window and it opens up that window with the text, the white background and black text, is there any opportunity for somebody to change the style of that output?
Yeah, that's a great. You can't do that by default, but it's just a window, right? So you could easily replace that functionality with something fancier. So you could use show window and have it open a window that you designed.
Okay.
Does that make sense? But there's no built-in feature to change the presentation of the window.
You could write your own WPF or something like that.
Absolutely, yeah, totally. It's a Windows operating system window.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to show you show command, which because there's just words don't capture it. Okay, is the font big enough here? Can you guys see what I'm doing?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it looks good.
Is it good? Okay.
Maybe make it just a little bit bigger.
Okay, I could do that. Let's go up here and okay. Is that better?
Yes.
There we go. Okay, so let's grab that show commands window, and I can also I don't know how to increase the font size in here, but this thing is super cool. So all I did was type show command. If I type show command and a commandlet name, I would get only that commandlet. I'm going to drop down this window, and you can see the modules that I have installed, and I can select from any of the modules. But if I go up here and type in the name box, let's do that a different way. I'm just going to do trigger for trigger. It's filtering the commands. Now, if I open one of these commands, it's telling me that I don't have the module installed. To install it, I just click Show Details. And this is a great thing for beginners, but it's really good for everybody. And here's the way it works. Each of these tabs represents a parameter set. Okay, I'm going to flip through the tabs. Switch parameters are represented by a checkbox, and the little asterisk over here indicates that the parameter is mandatory. And if you've never used a commandlet before, this is a great way to sort of flip through it and take a peek. And here's a really nice feature. So I'm going to say I want a trigger that runs once at 9 a.m. and it repeats every 2 hours. And it repeats. So I'm going to run this. Let's see. Will that run? You know, that's supposed to run. So, there it comes. And it's giving me an error because I don't have all of the correct parameters. But that's basically how it works, and it's a really useful thing. Let me get it back again and show you. Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll show you PowerShell ISE's version of it. So if you're in PowerShell ISE and you open it by default, it looks like this. And it has the same command window over here on the side with the same features. And in addition to having that copy feature, it has an insert feature which inserts the command into the command window. If you accidentally close this command window and you close Windows PowerShell ISE and then you reopen PowerShell ISE like you're restarting it, it does not restore the command window because it remembers your preferences, right? But if you ever need it again, you go back to View and it's Show Command Add-on. There have been people who have been very upset to have lost their show command window. Okay. So let's get back here, current slide. There we go. The persist parameter of new PS drive creates a real Windows mapped network drive that is not session specific. In PowerShell 2 and in PowerShell 3, if you don't use the persist parameter, you get a drive that exists only in the current session. Sometimes it can be very useful, but as soon as you close your console window or PowerShell ISE window, or if you're using a cool IDE like Primal Script, it closes your session. As soon as you close your session, you lose your drive. But the persist parameter creates a real mapped network drive, just as though you created it in Windows. There's a little bit of a restriction because it's really creating a mapped network drive, so it has to adhere to the requirements for mapped network drives in Windows. The root has to be on a remote computer, the name has to be just one letter, and it's user specific. So if you create a mapped network drive running as the least privileged user, and then you start a session running as administrator, you won't be able to find that network drive. It's specific to the user. But if you go and if you open a PowerShell window with a run as administrator option, then you'll find the map network drive that you created. Okay, very cool, very useful. This is one I used this week. Unblock file. This was written by Lee Holmes. If you guys have read the PowerShell cookbook, that's the guy. And he did this. He wrote this one, and I have thanked him 1,000 times. So what unblock file does is, if you're using the remote signed execution policy, and I think a lot of people are, and you download a file from the internet, you can't open it. Right, unless it's signed, unless it's digitally signed. And this means that you either can't use that file, or you have to get someone to sign it, or you end up changing your execution policy to unrestricted, which really isn't a great idea. But unblock file lets you unblock individual files. And again, you know, this could be a security risk. So be very careful about what you unblock. You know, be sure that you know what you're doing and use your best judgment. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger. This actually happened to me this week. Oh, can I not? I guess I can't make it bigger in this view. But basically what happened to me this week is that I got some new machines, and I wanted to grab my PowerShell profile and share it to my new machines. So I put them up on SkyDrive. Then I downloaded them from SkyDrive and added them to my system. And as soon as I opened PowerShell, I got an error saying that it could not load my profile file because it wasn't signed. So I ran unblock file on that profile file. I typed PowerShell to restart the session, and everything was just fine, and I had my profile. So that's the unblock file commandlet. Pretty awesome. ISE snippets. So you can create a reusable text snippet in Windows PowerShell ISE. It comes with a bunch of them. You can create your own. And they're created in little XML files, but we even have commandlets like new ISE snippet to create them. There are just a few gotchas. The description parameter is required. I'm not quite sure why. To view the snippets, you have to do Control-J. I guess we ran out of S or anything else that might have been a little easier to remember. You can also use the Start Snippets from the Edit menu, or right-click and Start Snippets. And if you try to run one of these snippet commandlets in the console or something other than PowerShell ISE, it works, but it generates an error. You can ignore that error, but it's a little disconcerting. There's no delete snippet commandlet. You can't delete any of the built-in snippets, but if you want to delete one of your own snippets, you just use the remove item commandlet. Okay, and let's take a peek at a snippet. Let's see if this demo will work for me. I'm going to get rid of this. Cool. Okay, so one of the things that I always promote is that for every function that you write, every commandlet, every function, every script that you share, it should have help. And to write function help, you use comment-based help. But there's no snippet for comment-based help. So here are the snippets. I just pressed Control-J to get those. Let me do it this another way. I'll go to the Edit menu and click Start Snippets. See it down here? Okay. Now, when the snippet is highlighted, you can see the full snippet text here, so you know what you're getting. I'm just going to scroll down here a little bit. There are some very useful things. I always use the switch one, right? There's a snippet for try, catch, finally, which is really useful as well. So very useful things. The ones for workflows, I think they're at the bottom. Yeah, these are great if you're new to writing script workflows. These are really very helpful. But if you notice, even though I whined about it, there is no snippet for comment-based help. There is comment-based help, and you can see it here in the full function, but it's not provided separately, so we're going to create one. Okay. So we're just going to do this. I'm going to grab that. I actually have it in, this is in my profile. I have a little function called add comment-based help, and I have this from PowerShell 2 to remind me. And there it is. So I'm going to grab that text and save it. Copy that. Okay. Okay. And then I'm going to do new ISE snippet and title. Just going to say comment. Oh, I can't type. Comment-based help. And the description is required. So I'm going to say something creative like comment-based help. And then this goes in the text parameter. It's text, so it has to be embedded within a string. So I'm going to create a string there and then paste that comment-based help text and press enter. Now, when I press Control-J, there's a comment-based help snippet. I can see it, and to add it, I just press enter. Okay, very cool stuff, very helpful. So, okay.
The question, June, was does that remain persistent, or is that just in your console session?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm actually going to show you the answer. Do you guys give prizes for good questions?
We can. We certainly can.
Yeah, that's great. So there's a get ISE snippet commandlet, and it doesn't get the snippets as you'd expect. It gets the snippet files. Okay, and you can see that these are in my home directory in Documents, Windows, PowerShell, Snippets. And this is a directory that is created on in your file system when you use the commandlet. And it saves each of the snippets that you create in a PS1 XML file. So this is really cool. So the answer is yes, it is persistent because it's saved in this file. But this is kind of cool. You can go and look at them. So I'm gonna do a get content. The alias is cat. Right? And so I can look at the XML files, and you can actually edit them. You're really liable to get in trouble and end up with errors in your files. But yes, they are saved on your hard drive, and you can recreate them and delete them and play with them. So, great question. Thank you. Okay. So, I'm going to move on to a few more advanced things. Does anybody have any questions about is this helpful? Are people enjoying this?
Yeah, the response is great.
Okay.
Any questions? Yeah, we got one question, June.
Sure.
The first three on the PowerShell, it comes from the code. You take the 3.0 and install it on 2008 or 2 or 7. You don't get all the same components that are in one call instantaneously.
Is That's right. Yeah.
3.0,
Yeah.
2008, you're only going to get some install.
Yeah. So June, the question. So the question is.
Are you basically installing some 2008 or 2?
V4, you mean, or V4? Okay. So the question, June, is about V4 and installing on a down-level operating system in the way that we did with V3, where
Right.
built-in functionality existed in Server 2012 and Windows 8 client that is, even though you install the Windows Management Framework on a down-level OS, you don't get nearly the amount of commandlet coverage. So I guess the question is, if we upgrade to V4 on a down-level OS, will we get parity with what's available in the newest flavors of Windows?
So I think the question is, are you going to get all of the modules that are available to you in the new version on old versions? And a lot of it depends on the module, on the individual module. So if there are features of the new module that aren't compatible with the operating system or aren't compatible with the versions of the .NET framework that are installed on that operating system, then you won't get them. But you will get all of the modules. You should get all of Windows PowerShell Core and the modules that come with it. And I think there are 11 or 12 of them. And you can always download the other modules. On a server machine, you use Server Manager, and I think it's Install New Windows Feature. Is that what it's called? And you can download modules that way. And in fact, if you're on a Windows Server 2012 machine and you've installed Windows PowerShell Framework 4.0 and you're missing Windows PowerShell 2.0, you can use Server Manager to download that as well.
And I guess I just added a potential workaround would be implicit remoting if you have remoting available to you.
Yeah, and what's cool on PowerShell 3 about implicit remoting is that it works on machines that are not running Windows operating systems. So any operating system that's compatible with WMI.
Cool.
Yeah. Actually, information about that, if I could stick in a plug, information about using, that's actually a sim session feature, and the information about that is in get module and import module, because those are the commandlets that you use to import modules and actually remotely control machines that are running operating systems other than Windows. So.
Very cool.
Super cool stuff, yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about disconnected sessions. This was just about my favorite feature in PowerShell 3, and I haven't heard a lot of buzz about it. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about it and tell you how I use it, and encourage you to try it. This is one of those things where you want to take this deck home, you want to go down here and read about disconnected sessions, about remote disconnected sessions. You want to go read blog posts about it, and then you want to try it, because once you try it, you'll find yourself using it all the time. So this is the primary scenario. You're at work, you start a PS session, right, which is a session that you can control. Right? You run some commands at the PS session, and it's time to take the bus home. Or I guess in Philadelphia it's the train, right? People still take the train, right? We don't have trains in Seattle. But anyway, so you need to leave, right? In PowerShell 2, what would happen is that you would either leave the machine running and it would shut down or time out or something, something like that, or you'd have to close your PowerShell window or shut down your machine, or if you lost power, so inadvertently ended a session, the commands would immediately stop running, the session would be lost, any results that had accumulated that hadn't been saved in files would be gone. And that's not true in PowerShell 3. So here's the PowerShell 3 scenario. You start a session. You start some commands in the session. You disconnect from the session, either explicitly or implicitly. You could see that that's in those nice square brackets that show you it's optional. You can close Windows PowerShell, shut down the machine, go home. Then you get home, you boot up your laptop, you start Windows PowerShell, you reconnect to the session. The commands continue to run in the session. Perhaps they're still running, perhaps they're done, and you can get the results of the session. Okay. Super cool stuff, okay? There are a bunch of disconnected session commandlets. I'll leave those to you to read at home. Okay, and this is how it works. So in PowerShell 2, the PS sessions were actually saved in the current session, in the local session on the client computer. Okay. In PowerShell 3, the sessions are actually saved on the remote computer in the session configuration. Okay. So new PS session in PowerShell 3 creates a connection that's saved at the remote end of the connection and remains at the remote end even if the current local session is disconnected. Now again, the remote machine has to be running PowerShell 3. Okay? The local machine needs access to the commandlets to disconnect and reconnect. But what's really important here is that the machine that's the destination for the connection is running PowerShell 3 or later. Okay? So this was a breaking change in PowerShell 3. If you run get PS session with a computer name parameter, in PowerShell 2, it gets you the sessions that are on your local machine that are connected, where the remote end is the value of the computer name parameter. In PowerShell 3, this actually does a remote lookup for you. It goes to the remote machine whose name is the value of the computer name parameter, and it looks up all of your sessions, these are user specific, all of your sessions that terminate at that machine. Okay? So it basically tells you all of the sessions that you have running on that remote computer. If you ever want the sessions that are just on your local computer, you omit the computer name parameter and just type get PS session. Okay, so here's an example of this running. So I'm on the computer server 01, which is my client computer. Okay, and I do a new PS session, and then I do a get PS session, and it tells me now pay attention here to the value of the state and availability properties. Okay, so it tells me that the state is opened and the availability is available. And this is typical. This is what you get when you start a new session. Okay. Now, if I look at this, so I've connected to server 02. Okay. Whoops. Here we go. I've connected here to server 02. Now, if I get on to server 02 and I do a get PS session, okay, and here I've omitted the computer name parameter, it shows me this session. And it says that it's a session from, the session is called session 1, and that it's connected to my computer. And from my point of view, from the point of view of server 2, the state is opened, but it's not available. It's busy. Someone else is using this session. Okay? And if I were to go to a third computer, this one, session 3, that's not involved in this transaction, from the perspective of session 3, the session is disconnected. Now, that doesn't mean that someone has explicitly disconnected from it. It means that server 3 does not have a session that's connected to it. Okay? So it is disconnected from the perspective of server 3, and it's busy because server 01 is using it. Now, to disconnect a session, I can do it implicitly just by shutting PowerShell down. I can use the disconnect PS session commandlet, or I can use the super cool in disconnected session parameter of the invoke command commandlet. And what that does is it runs a command in a session that is automatically disconnected before it starts to run. Okay? And you can go read about that. It's very handy, and it prevents some errors. If you're sure that you want to run this in a disconnected way anyway, this is a great way to do it because it makes certain that none of the results end up on your local computer, that they're all saved on the remote computer. if you want to connect or reconnect to a session that's disconnected, you use the connect PS session commandlet just to connect. And if you want to connect and get the results of commands that had run in that session, you use the receive PS session commandlet. And this is all described in, you can see it down at the bottom here, in About Remote Disconnected Sessions. Lots of examples in there. Try them all. So here are just a few gotchas. One of the parameters of new PS session is the session options parameter, and you create a session option by using the new PS session option commandlet. Be careful with those option values in disconnected sessions because they can prevent you from being able to reconnect to the session. So the idle timeout parameter, idle timeout milliseconds parameter, tells you how long the disconnected session can be idle before it's deleted. Be sure that you have sufficient time. I think we, at the end, after the preview of PowerShell 3, we actually changed those so that the defaults are max value. But take a peek, make sure that you have the right value in there based on what you need. And also that you don't have a value that's so long that you have sessions sitting out there that you're not using. Output buffering modes determines what happens to set output when the little output buffer is full. Block stops the command from running. So you might have reconnected to your session being absolutely certain that the little script that you ran would have completed by now, but no, it's blocked. If you use the drop value of output buffering mode, the command or script, whatever you're running, won't be blocked, but some of the output might have been deleted. So the obvious way to handle this is to make sure that your output is being routed to a file and saved somewhere. But watch these values. A max idle timeout, you can figure that one out, is another one to just keep your eye on when you're running disconnected sessions. So I'm just going to do a little demo. I hope the demo gods are with me. Okay, and I've got the commands up here so that I don't make a mess of this when I run them. The other thing that I often do when I'm creating a disconnected session is to give the session a name. That's a great way to identify. If you've got a bunch of these sessions running, it's a great way to identify your session. The ID numbers are not consistent from machine to machine. When you look at a session at another machine, it might have a different ID number. If you disconnect a session and reconnect, the ID number might change, but the name should be persistent. The only problem with these names, though, is that they're not guaranteed to be unique. So it's up to you to make sure that they're unique. So is everybody with me? Are we good here?
Yep, we're all good.
Okay,
Can you make that a little bit bigger, June?
Oh, you bet. Everybody knows about this slidey bar down at the bottom in ISE?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Is that cool? Everybody knows a slidey bar. I'm sure that there's a technical term for one of these guys.
It will always be slidey bar from now on for me.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble. Okay. So anyway, I'm going to use the new PS session commandlet. I'm actually, this is not going to work. Because if I'm going to use a local host, I need to open ISE with administrator privileges. So where's my ISE? Right click. If you're running this in the typical way on a remote machine, you don't need to run as administrator. Okay. And I'm going to open that again. Okay, there we go. All right, and let's grab this. Aha, there. Okay, whoops. And paste it down there. Okay, good. And let's see if that works. Okay, and I've got my session right there. Okay, the state is opened and it's available. And I am going to do something just completely radical. I'm going to create a variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use invoke command to create the hello variable in my session. And what's really unique about this, you can tell that I'm actually a writer because I use correct punctuation when writing hello world. You may never see this again. So I'm going to create this variable in the remote session. Okay. And I'll show you that the variable is in the remote session. Okay, there it is. But it's not in my local session. Okay, we're good there? Okay. So now what we're going to do is get rid of it. I'm going to do get PS session dash computer name localhost. Do I need to raise this a little bit? I'm going to scroll down here to make sure everybody can see this. This is almost magic. Okay. And I'm going to use disconnect PS session. Okay. Okay. Now you can see, I'm going to raise this a little bit up higher. Let's get rid of this. Okay. And you can see that the session state is disconnected. The availability is none, which means that it's actually available. I'm not connected to it, but it's not busy. Okay? And at this point, I can, well, let's do it. I can close PowerShell. I can stop the machine. I can go away for a time that's compatible with the idle timeout. And come back here and start it again. Let's grab, gosh, I can't type when I'm nervous, can I? Okay. Run as administrator. And I'm back in my session. Okay, and I'm back in my session, she says. There we go. And now I can go and look for that session. It's get PS session dash computer name localhost. And there's my session. It's still disconnected. The availability is none. And now I will connect it. And I'm going to save it in a different variable. I'll make this one session 2. Okay. And let's go look at the little session in session 2. Now it's opened and available. Okay. And, oops, I can do that invoke commandlet. And session S2. And the command is that hello variable. And it's still there. And it's not there on my local machine. So you guys are all oohing and ahhing, right?
Yes.
Yes, everyone realizes the value of this. So nobody, the other thing that I really should mention here is in PowerShell 2, the way to create a variable that was local, or to use the value of a variable that was local to your machine in a remote command was this really horrible, awful syntax. And now you use the using keyword. I don't have that in this presentation, but that's definitely something to look up. And it's probably in one of the About Remote files, and I can send that to you. I just thought of it. Should have been in this presentation. But anyway, the disconnected sessions is a really fabulous tool. I'm sure that you can think of much more interesting ways to use it than creating variables that type hello world with correct punctuation. But it's a really fabulous thing, and it will save you tons of time. So play with it, learn the vagaries of it, and use it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how disconnected sessions works. The PS sessions are saved on the server side, right, or the remote end of the session. And they're saved in session configurations. Now, these session configurations are sometimes colloquially called endpoints. They're not really, because WSMan endpoints are something else. But if you hear that, connect to the endpoint, what they mean is the session configuration. The sessions are saved on the server side of the connection. Okay, so a session configuration is actually a collection of settings that creates the environment of the session for a remote user. So when I do that new PS session, I'm actually connecting to a session configuration, and the environment in my PS session is determined by the values of the session configuration. Under the covers, these session configurations are WSMan plugins, and I have a little dir command that uses the WSMan drive to go and take a peek at them. Every session uses a session configuration. You don't know that because you're getting the default session configuration, Microsoft.PowerShell. If you use new PS workflow session to start a workflow, you'll get the Microsoft.PowerShell.workflow session configuration. Ron talked about ACLs last week. I'm going to go and listen to that one. But the ACL on the session configuration determines who can connect to the computer remotely. So the only way that you can use a session configuration is if the ACL gives you permission to that file. Okay, so if none of the session configurations, if none of the ACLs on any of the session configurations allows me to use that session configuration, then I can't connect to the remote computer. Okay, and the way you can think of this is that the ACLs and the session configuration determine who can connect to that remote computer and what they can do. So these session configurations are your way of protecting your computer from remote users, right? And you can also create custom session configurations for individuals or groups or people who have a certain role.
June, we have sorry to interrupt, we have a question.
Oh, you bet.
So did you hear that, June?
No, it sounds like everybody's underwater.
Oh, okay. The question was about encryption and what is the mechanism used to encrypt the communication back and forth.
You know, I don't want to say, Ron or somebody might know, you might know. I think it's SSL, but does somebody know what's going on there?
This is application related. So you are in the network authenticated, and it's your session that you use the machine, but the network authenticated. It's almost like a star. So it's protected by it's either protected by SSL if it's served on the machine, or it's encrypted by session security. Pretty sure it keeps that but this is one box that's definitely this definitely would be by session key for sure. And also combined with the machine names and all that has to do with the instance. So this is not like I can get it back.
Mark, being about this is there any future vision to integrate like SSH into the stack?
So the question, June, is there any future vision for integrating SSH into the PowerShell into PowerShell?
Yeah. So let me tell you what I can tell you, and that's that I'm never allowed to tell you anything that's not released. So in this case, I happen not to know at all. I really don't. The question has been asked many times. I don't know the answer, but even if I did know the answer, I couldn't tell you. Yeah, and well, the reason is really kind of a practical one. What if I said yes, and your company started planning a product based on that, and then we didn't do it, right? For whatever reason, it would really create a false expectation. So we never want to do that. You'll notice that in the help files, we try never to refer to any. We never use will, or you'll see it soon, or we haven't done it yet. Because we really don't want to create any expectations for a company like Microsoft. That's an implicit contract. So.
Yep.
But it has been asked, and you know, PowerShell is fully extensible, so anyone can write a module that can add extensible features like security features to PowerShell. Okay. Are we good to go on? Because the questions are excellent.
Yes, I think we're good to go.
Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about how to create those custom session configurations. In PowerShell 2, you had to write a C# program. Basically, what you were writing was a WSMan plugin. But in PowerShell 3, to create a session configuration, you use the register session configurations commandlet. And the word register will indicate to you that it is persistent and saved. And the other thing you can do is to have very fine control over your session configurations is that you can create a session configuration file, which is a file with a hash table in it that specifies the properties of the session configuration. And if you don't want to mess with creating a hash table and its syntax, you can use the new PS session configuration file commandlet. I have these at the bottom. You can go and play with them. I use them all the time. They're very easy to use. Even though this is an advanced feature, beginners can do this. They've made it really easy to use. So, for instance, I can use the new PS session configuration file. Gosh, what a mess. Sorry about that. I can use the new PS session configuration file commandlet to create a session that includes only certain modules. And I can do it just that easy, just that one command. So I create the session configuration file. I specify an output file. It has a .pssc file name extension. And then I use register PS session configuration and the path to that PSSC file. And I have a new session configuration. Alternately, I can use the parameters of register PS session configuration. Can anybody tell me what that last command on the slide does, that register PS session configuration one? What I've done there?
Any ideas? What was that?
Set a startup script.
Sets a startup script. It was.
Startup profile.
So, June, you're registering the session configuration with your profile?
Yeah, session configurations by default don't have a profile in them. So this is my personal one. I've connected to a remote machine. I want my profile in there, so I just run it as a startup script. Really handy little trick. Okay. I'm going to switch to schedule jobs. Are there any questions on disconnected sessions or session configuration files or any of that? This is the kind of thing where you have to go in and get your hands on it. You know, let me just grab my PowerShell window here for a second. It's my default one. And I'm going to use a function that's in my profile. It's getCodeParms. I can share this with you if you want it, but I just want to show you the parameters of these guys. So it's register PS session configuration. There we go. And these are all of the options that you can apply to your session configurations, and that actually, you know, configures a remote session. And this is even without creating a session configuration file. So you can specify the processor architecture. You can set session options. You could do that startup script. You can see the throttling mechanisms up here for received data size per command and per object. And then let's do that same thing on new PS session configuration file, and you can see what's going on there. You can specify the language mode. You can specify which modules are there, which commandlets and functions and providers are visible, which scripts to process, which PowerShell version is running. I mean, it's really very fine control, and you don't need to write a C# program. This is available to anybody who can run a commandlet. So super cool. Okay, are we doing okay on time? We're like over, but that's okay.
Yeah, I think we're good on time.
Okay, so let's go back to this. Scheduled jobs. Scheduled jobs are this funky hybrid of background jobs and scheduled tasks. So when you create a scheduled job, unlike a scheduled task, you can see the scheduled job in Task Scheduler, but you can manage it like a normal background job in Windows PowerShell. So it has a lot of flexibility. It's a very cool thing to do. In Windows PowerShell 3, there is a scheduled tasks module. So you can also configure scheduled tasks in Windows PowerShell. But this is actually, you're actually creating jobs. And one of the cool things about running these scheduled jobs is that the results, they run entirely in the background, and the results are saved on your computer. and you can look at them and retrieve those results at any time. Let's see, what else? You use job commandlets to run instances of the job. Okay. Here are just a few concepts of scheduled jobs. A job trigger triggers or starts the job, so it establishes a schedule for when the job runs. You can set a bunch of options, again, fine control for your scheduled job. You specify the command that runs in the scheduled job. That can be a script block or a script. And you create the scheduled job using the registered scheduled job commandlet you have to run as administrator to create a scheduled job. Okay. Here are just a few gotchas. Again, you have to run as an administrator. Everyone always forgets. I do. Be careful about those options. The scheduled jobs uses the task scheduler default values for options, same options that you've come to know and love in Task Scheduler, but the options might actually prevent the task from ever running. So be mindful of those options. I have all of them listed in the new scheduled job option section, and you can get help for any of the individual parameters and take a peek at the help for those options if you have any questions about them. So here's a case where I do a get scheduled job, and I am running as administrator, or I start a session that runs as administrator, and I go to look at that scheduled job, and it's not there. If I create, this is the flip side where I would get scheduled job, I don't find it. Then I run an elevated session, I do a get scheduled job, and there's my scheduled job. So these are user specific. And
June, we have a sorry to interrupt. We have a question from the chat.
Oh no, yeah.
And the question was, what background service or process actually schedules the jobs?
It's its own service, and it uses it has its own sort of add-in to the task scheduler service, but it uses Windows PowerShell jobs. So that the main feature that's running in the background is Windows PowerShell job.
Cool.
The Windows PowerShell job engine. Yeah.
Another question
yeah,
was,
sure.
if you disable UAC, do you need to run as administrator?
I don't know. You should never disable UAC.
Yeah, don't disable UAC.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I'm sorry. If you want to see mine, I can grab some of mine. And I'm going to run as administrator because I always forget. Does everybody know the cool command to elevate a window, right? It's, if this will actually resolve, good morning, start process, PowerShell, -verb, run as. Is that cool? Okay. Okay, so I have a little function in my profile called elevate that just runs that command. But I'm going to do a get schedule job so you can see the ones that I have. Whoops. There we go. And I have one that updates help for me. We'll talk about updatable help in just a minute. And the other one that checks updatable help versions. So I can look at these using get job, and I'll specify the schedule job name because the instances have the same name as the schedule job. And these are actually instances that are running. So if I do the get schedule job, what is it, update my help? There it is. I can go and look at the job trigger. I think it's job trigger. Is that right? Yeah, there we go. So it runs every day. Can you guys see this? It runs every day at 10:20 in the morning. It runs in the background. I don't even know about it. I have the options set. Well, let's look at the options. I have the options set. I'm going to raise this a little bit higher. I have the options set so that it starts, even if my computer is running on batteries, it doesn't stop. If it starts to go on batteries, it wakes the computer to run. You could see that I've hit every possible reason that the thing won't run. It runs elevated, so that means it runs with the run as administrator option. Let's see, it will. The idle duration is very long. I don't have to worry about that. One cool thing about these scheduled job commandlets, see this job definition property that's listed here at the bottom? You can use the triggers on multiple job definitions, on multiple scheduled jobs. And the options and the triggers are available on any of the scheduled jobs. So if I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I'm going to do get scheduled job in that same job, and I'm going to do get job trigger. Okay, so now I have the job trigger, and in the job trigger, I want to know which jobs actually use that job trigger. So I go to the job definition property, and it returns. It's only one right now, but it returns all of the definitions that use that job. The scheduled job commandlets are very cool because they allow you to get back to that definition at any point. And if you're doing some detailed scripting, this turns out to be really useful. One little gotcha, though, is that if you're doing set scheduled job, I'm going to do that get code parms again thing on set scheduled job. Okay, there's a name parameter, but it just changes the name. There's no path parameter. There are no parameters in this commandlet that let you specify the scheduled job that you want to change. Okay, so what you're intended to do is do a get scheduled job commandlet, get scheduled job command, and pipe it to set scheduled job. Okay, this is the way it works by design. So it's a little bit different than some of the other commandlets. It's a separate module designed by a separate team. So it works a little bit differently. Take a peek at the help. It will warn you if you need to do something, and you can play around with it and use the examples. Okay, let's get back to work. Okay, dynamic type data. So type data in Windows PowerShell determines what properties and methods are on the different types of objects in PowerShell. So for instance, the datetime object has that fabulous toUniversalTime property that lets you figure out when the podcast really starts in your time zone. And the types that are added to PowerShell, to the .NET types. Let's try again. PowerShell adds some extended type data to the properties and methods that are already present on the .NET types, and that's called extended type data. And the way that PowerShell adds extended type data are in these types.ps1 XML files that you'll find in your PS home directory. Okay? They are really hard to write. Go and peek at one. If you look in about types.ps1 XML, I do my very best to explain how to do this. It's a little bit tricky. Okay? And if you're trying to do anything complex, it's even trickier. So this additional functionality in PowerShell 3 is really cool. It adds extended type data only to the current session, but it's much simpler than creating your own types.ps1 XML file or editing a types.1ps XML file. The update type data commandlet dash type name, the type name parameter specifies the type that's the subject of the command. So which type do I want to add a member to? And the member name parameter specifies the member that you're going to add, the property or method. And the cool default display property set parameter changes the properties that are displayed by default when you use a format commandlet, like format list or format table or format custom. The get type data commandlet, which is new for PowerShell 3, gets the type data in the current session, and that includes all the type data from the types.ps1 XML file, plus the dynamic type data that you add using update type data. Remove type data deletes the extended type data from the current session. Be careful how you use that. Okay. So let's take a peek at this. I was going to do this in a demo, but I always mistype this stuff, so I'll just show you how to do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a supports updatable help property to the module info object. God, this is kind of a mess. You really can't point, can you? Okay, there we go. So the subject, the type name, identifies the type that's the subject of the command. So we're going to be changing that module info object, and this is the one that get module returns. And we're going to be adding a new property called supports updatable help. And the member type is a script property. So we're going to provide a script, and the result of that script is the value of the property. And in the value parameter, we just have a little tiny script that says, if this module has a help info URI property value. So if it has a help info URI property because it's a module, right? But if there's something in that help info URI property, if it has a property value, then the value of our supports updatable help property is true, and otherwise it's false. Okay? So if we run that and then we run get module, it suddenly has a supports updatable help property, and you can see the value for each of the modules. Okay? This is a very useful thing to do. You can do this right in the middle of a script. Okay? Now this shows how to use the default display property set, which is the one that specifies the properties that appear by default. Now, I can't do this on that PS module info object because there's already a default display property set defined for it in a types.ps1 XML file, and I can't override it. Okay, so I'm going to use the system.datetime object. That's the one that getDate returns. And here we add, we say that the day of week, date, and time of day properties are the ones that I want to see by default when I use a format commandlet. And you can see that then when I use getDate and format as a list, those are the ones that I get. The default display property set can include properties that you just created using that member name parameter. So I could have included, if I could do it with PS module info, I could have included the supports updatable help property. This is all explained in get help update type data. Okay, I'm going to switch to updatable help and go through this kind of fast. I assume everybody knows how to use updatable help. Any questions? Are we good?
I think we're good.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through this really quickly. When we first brought out PowerShell 3, this was really unfamiliar to people, and my guess is that most people are very familiar and very comfortable with updatable help. So basically, we had a problem because our help files were static, but our help was dynamic. The help changed all the time, and you could only see the changes online. So now you can download updated help. As soon as it's released, you can run an update help commandlet as a background job, as a scheduled job, as a scheduled task. If a computer is offline, you can use the save help commandlet to save the help in a file system directory, and then use the update help commandlet to update from the file system directory source. It has multi-language support. We have the online help works even if you don't have help files on the local machine, and get help actually creates some basic auto-generated help if you don't have any help files online or on the box. Okay. The update help commandlet is one of the most helpful commandlets in PowerShell. When we first talked about designing updatable help, what we were going to do was download a zip file for you. And then you were going to have to do all the rest. That was a little tough for people. So the update help commandlet does it all for you. It figures out which modules support updatable help. It goes out to the website where the files are stored. It grabs them. It makes sure that if you already have that version of help, it doesn't download it again. If you don't have the newest version of help that's available, it downloads it, unpacks it, verifies it, and installs it exactly where it needs to be. You could just sit there and watch update help work and clap when it's done. It's really kind of amazing. Could you imagine trying to get all those steps right by yourself? And then once update help is updated to help, you don't need to restart Windows. You don't need to restart Windows PowerShell. You just type get help. Save help does it in 2 steps. It downloads the help, but it downloads it to a file system directory that you specify, and then you can use update help with the source path parameter pointed at that file system directory, and then it does all the rest of it for you. Just a couple of gotchas with update help. You have to be an administrator to update help for the modules in the System32 directory. Some modules don't support updatable help. How sad. To figure out which ones do, I mentioned this before, it's the help info URI property value. You might never need it, but it will help you to troubleshoot why updatable help isn't working. It's possible that there are mistakes in the help, or the help just hasn't been released or updated yet. Update help can't write help. And when we created updatable help, we also enhanced online help. You use that doing the -online parameter. Is everybody familiar with online help, the -online parameter?
Yep.
Okay, good. To tell whether online help is supported, you could look at the help URI property value. So not help info URI, but help URI. If you want to support updatable help for your module, I wrote instructions for it. You can go to those locations. There's one for supporting updatable help. There's one for supporting online help. And if you ever get stuck, you can just come to me and I'll help you. So real quick, Windows PowerShell workflows. Workflows are a marriage of Windows PowerShell and the Windows Workflow Foundation. It lets you run scripts very efficiently on hundreds of machines because things run in parallel. So if I have a list of computers in a invoke command, and I have the value of the computer name parameter is a whole list of computers, it runs the commands on those in series, one at a time. Okay, and this workflows by default run in parallel. They are very quick. They run activities. They don't run commandlets. Each activity runs in its own separate session, although we do some stuff on the back end so that you can pipe one activity to another. Workflows have the characteristic of checkpoints. So you can create a point in the script in which the state and data are saved in case you need to go back to it, in case it crashes. All is not lost. You can go back to the last checkpoint. And it supports disconnected sessions. In fact, disconnected sessions was actually developed for workflows and then extended to non-workflow sessions. Information on writing a script workflow is in TechNet. But it's actually under Windows Server 2012. It's a little bit tricky to find, so I've created the slide. You'll get the deck. You'll be able to find it. When you're writing a script workflow, write it in Windows PowerShell ISE. All of the rules for writing script workflows are built into PowerShell ISE, and it will do one of those nice squiggles for you if you've gotten something wrong. So basically, the thing that you need to remember about a workflow is that there's a workflow server, and that's not a machine, it's a program. And you need to connect to the workflow server program when you run a workflow. And what this little diagram shows is that the server, the workflow server, can be on the client computer or on a separate machine. The managed nodes are the computers that are affected by the command, okay? And those managed nodes can be separate from the client and the server, or you can actually run a workflow that changes something on your local machine. Okay? These are instructions for running a workflow. I'm not going to go through this. I'll give you the deck. You can read the instructions. Okay? Checkpoints are those points in the at some part of your program, at some section of your program where you've just done something important and you don't want to lose your results. So this is the, if it fails, this is what I want to keep. Okay. There are some default checkpoints that are set for you when you create a workflow, but it's a good idea to analyze your program and decide where you'd like to put those checkpoints. I have in the instructions for writing a script workflow, there are some guidelines for where to put checkpoints. Okay. The workflow author can add checkpoints using the checkpoint workflow activity or the PhLPoSH activity common parameter. And the workflow user can add checkpoints. They can't disable checkpoints that the workflow author has added, but they can add them. And they add them using the PhLPoSH workflow common parameter. Okay. There are suspend job and resume job commandlets that work on workflow jobs. Suspend job pauses the job, it runs to the next checkpoint, takes the checkpoint and stops at that point. Resume job resumes from the last checkpoint. So you can tell that if you didn't set any checkpoints and you try to use suspend job, it's just going to run to the end. So you lose the value of the suspend and resume commandlets if you don't set your checkpoints or don't set them optimally. Now, you notice that I've kind of crossed out the only on that works only on workflow jobs, and there's a bit of a subtlety to that, so let me explain it. With the package, with the core pack, Windows PowerShell core, suspend job and resume job work only on workflow jobs. But if you have a module and you create a new job type and you enable suspend job and resume job and checkpoints, then they'll work on your jobs as well. Okay? So it's not really true that it works only on workflow jobs, but it works only on workflow jobs in Windows PowerShell core. So again, in a workflow, you're running a series of activities in a separate session. You can't call methods, but anything that you're prohibited from doing in a workflow, you can run in an inline script, which is actually a script that runs separate from a workflow and returns its results to the workflow. And there's a about inline script help file. And you have to use explicit parameter names. You can't use abbreviations or aliases. And that will drive you a little bit crazy. And Windows PowerShell ISE will prevent you from making a mistake by using a parameter name that's not the full parameter name. Okay. Everything runs in parallel in a workflow. So the managed nodes run in parallel by default. But you can also run any command in parallel by using the parallel keyword. And when things run in parallel, they run concurrently. They're in indeterminate order. You can't specify an order, but they run very fast because they can run together. So again, those managed nodes are processed in parallel. You can use the parallel keyword. The for each, when you're running in a workflow, the for each object commandlet has a parallel parameter that lets you specify that the commands inside that for each script block run in parallel. And there's even a sequence keyword that lets you run a few commands in sequence within a parallel script block. So here's the sequence in operation. So here we have a parallel script block. But there are just a few commands that need to run in a particular order because one command is dependent on the output of a previous command, and you can use the sequence keyword for that. Okay. To run a workflow, you use the new PS workflow session commandlet, and what's really happening behind the scenes there is that it's using the Microsoft.PowerShell.workflow session configuration. So it's using a custom session configuration designed just for workflows, and then you use the session that you created with new PS workflow session, and you run your commands in that session. Okay. When you create that new PS workflow session, you're actually connecting to the workflow server and running the commands on the workflow server. In this case, you can see that we're running a get inventory workflow on the on the managed nodes in the value of the PS computer name parameter. So in workflows, computer name refers to the workflow server, and PS computer name refers to those managed nodes. Okay, I'm running it as a job. See the as job common parameter there, and I've specified a job name so that I can use the get job commandlet to manage that job. I can suspend the job. I can disconnect my session. I can reconnect the session and resume the job. These workflows fully support disconnected sessions. Okay. And I think I'm just about done.
Awesome.
Okay, and I just want to get to that last slide. There we go. Just a couple of community resources. I'm sure you guys know a lot about these. I've included the folks that actually just a small sample of the folks that I follow on Twitter. I heard a little bit of conversation about buying books before the meeting started, and I just want to caution you that because PowerShell 4 is coming out, a lot of these books are going to be revised and updated for PowerShell 4. So it's probably not a great time to spend a lot of money on books. You might want to wait and see what comes out about PowerShell 4.
Cool. Well, thank you, June. That was a awesome presentation. So, any questions? Anything in the chat, John? No. All right. Well, thanks again to you, June, and we'll be sending you a care package very soon.
That's great. Thanks. And if let me get back to that first slide. But whoop, I am not great with PowerPoint, am I? Here we go. My email address is on here, as well as my Twitter feed. Whoops. So please feel free to contact me. I am no longer the PowerShell help writer. Gabby Kaplan is doing it now, and she's doing a great job for core. But I can still, if you email me, I can forward things to Gabby, or you can send them straight to Gabby. And please feel free to give us feedback on the help. You can use connect.microsoft.com. That's a great way to do it.
Okay, very cool. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
We'll be sure to keep to post all the slide deck and everything from today. We'll send tweet a link out for you.
Great, thank you.
Yep. So we just wanted to